Hey everyone, welcome to episode 319 of the All Dolphins podcast on this Tuesday, July 30th, 2024. I am Alain Poupart, the publisher of Miami Dolphins on SI, URL si.com/NFL/Dolphins, on Twitter at A Poupart NFL, my last name NFL. And as you can see, I am flying solo today, but don't worry, there will be a lot of discussion, monologue maybe, uh, talking about all things Miami Dolphins and what we saw at practice at the Baptist Health Training Complex on Tuesday, on a day that was pretty good for the defense. Bad, very bad, maybe even as far as we could go as far as brutal when it comes to the offense. And we're going to discuss all of it, including the offensive line uncertainty issues, the young defensive players who continue to shine, some of the same names, the two practices I have seen since I've been back from my vacation. There are a couple of guys who clearly have jumped out, shown some really good things, and we'll get into all of that after we do our history lesson this year dealing with the season of 2019, episode 319. And this was the year there was a massive rebuilding project by the Dolphins, also described in some circles as the tank for Tua season, which began with the hiring of Brian Flores as head coach after he had been the defensive coordinator of the New England Patriots, helping them win the Super Bowl the previous season with a complete shutdown of the LA Rams' powerful offense, 13-3 in that Super Bowl, where they muffled Jared Goff and company with a really, really impressive defensive performance. The Dolphins drafted Christian Wilkins with the 13th overall pick that year. Certainly hit on that one. Didn't have a first-round pick because it went to the Arizona Cardinals in a trade along with the fifth-round pick for quarterback Josh Rosen, as the Dolphins were still in the middle of seeking a long-term answer at quarterback. And while it's certainly easy to look back at the results and see how it played out and say, ooh, that was a horrible trade by the Dolphins, it says here, I don't have an issue, and I have a hard time dinging the Dolphins here for at least giving it a shot. And again, Josh Rosen the year before had been the 10th overall pick, so there was something there with him as a prospect. And the first time you see the guy throw the ball in training camp, there are some impressive physical trait. The ball, he can spin it. However, Josh Rosen lacked the intangibles to have any kind of success in the NFL. And let's just say his coachability factor was on the low side. And I'm being very polite. He was not a guy who took to coaching particularly well. And that showed up. And pretty quickly, actually, where in a couple of preseason games, he looked like a deer in headlights in the pocket. There was zero pocket awareness of what was going on around him. Became very clear that this guy had a long way to go and probably was a long shot to emerge and develop as a quality NFL quarterback, which perhaps made it weird after the Dolphins spent the entire offseason dumping veteran players with high salaries to acquire draft capital and accumulate cap space. That included trading Ryan Tannehill to the Tennessee Titans. It included letting Cameron Wake walk as a free agent. On the eve of training camp, or the start of the regular season, there was a massive trade of Laramie Tunsil to the Houston Texans. That's a trade that's worked out very well for what it produced for the Dolphins because of the draft picks. That one wasn't part necessarily of the purge of the rebuilding. This was an issue where Chris Greer said after the fact that the Texans called initially, he rejected their offer. They called back offering something more. He rejected again. And the Texans were very, very persistent to the point where it got to where Chris Greer was like, I can't reject it. And Greer shared the story after the trade of bringing Laramie Tunsil in his office to inform him of the trade. And Tunsil, once he learned how much the Dolphins were getting in return, which was 2 first-round picks, second-round pick, a fourth, and a couple of players, Johnson Bademosi and Julian Davenport, who signed with the team recently, is back in the league. While Tunsil's reaction was like, yeah, I'd do the trade myself. So that worked out very well. And then after week 2, the Dolphins wound up trading Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 21st round pick which became the 18th overall pick. That turned into Austin Jackson, a tackle from USC. That trade also wasn't in the original plans. However, there was a clash between Minkah Fitzpatrick and Brian Flores, in part because Flores wanted to use Fitzpatrick as a jack of all trades in the secondary, whereas Fitzpatrick was more interested in being a center fielder type of free safety, and which is what he's been with the Pittsburgh Steelers since leaving, and he's turned into one of the best safeties in the NFL. And I am somebody who has defended Brian Flores from the multitude of shots he takes from disgruntled Dolphin fans because of his lack of success offensively. The dude could coach defense like nobody's business. Great X's and those guys may not have been great in terms of player relations. The handling or mishandling of the Minkah Fitzpatrick situation probably would be one of the biggest knocks I would have on his Dolphin tenure. So the Dolphins go into the season with obviously very low expectations, having basically reshuffled the roster. The number of players they claimed on waivers after the cuts to 53 was ridiculous. There was about 7 players. The roster was churning every week. And yet the Dolphins go into the regular season opener against the Baltimore Ravens, decide that Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be the quarterback in a tough situation where Brian Flores has to face his players and go with the guy who gives them the best chance. However, from an organization and big picture, probably would have made more sense to start Josh Rosen, because certainly you can make the argument, listen, we gave up 2 draft picks to get him. We need to see what we have in him. So the Dolphins started with Ryan Fitzpatrick. The first 2 games, as Dolphin fans should know, ended with losses of 59-10 and 43-0. Then Flores turned to Josh Rosen for the Week 3 game against Dallas. It was 31-6. There was a game against the Chargers in Week 4. It wasn't much better. And in Week 5 it was against Washington. The Dolphins were trailing 17-3. Ryan Fitzpatrick, eventually Brian Flores had enough, replaced Josh Rosen, brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick. Quarterbacks, scores 2 touchdowns. The Dolphins go for a 2-point conversion, end up losing 17-16. Ryan Fitzpatrick resumes as a starting quarterback. The Dolphins progressively get better and better and better and better. Eventually wind up going 5-4 down the stretch, including a very satisfying win against the New England Patriots in the season finale at Gillette Stadium that cost the Patriots a first-round bye. Patriots wound up being upset at home by the Titans, and that was the end of the Patriots dynasty. Tom Brady left after the season. Patriots haven't been the same since. Dolphins wound up 5-11 that year. They lost a chance at the number 1 overall pick the next to last week of the regular season when they defeated the Cincinnati Bengals in overtime in a game they led was 35-21 with 2 minutes left. The Bengals scored 2 touchdowns, sandwiched around an onside kick. Dolphins went in overtime, and there were some we still maintained that cost the Dolphins the number 1 overall pick. No, they would have had to lose at New England in the finale, and the Bengals would have had to lose against Cleveland for the Dolphins to land that number 1 pick. But with that win against the Bengals in the next to last week, the Dolphins lost any hope of that number 1 overall pick, settled for number 5. They still got Tua, and here we are now 4 years later. So that's the history lesson in a nutshell. There'll be another history lesson related to John Elway comments a little bit later on, but let's move on to what happened at practice on the Tuesday. And as we mentioned, it was a bad day for the Dolphin offense. In terms of highlights, there was a really, really nice throw by Tua, kind of down the seam. It was a completion to Anthony Schwartz between defenders. Very pretty throw. There was a nice no-look pass from Tua to Jonnu Smith over the middle, which was really cool. However, the pass was a little bit behind Jonnu Smith. Still should have caught it. That's a drop. Bad day for Jonnu Smith. He dropped that one. He had another drop on a pass from one of the other 2 quarterbacks, Mike White or Skylar Thompson. Don't recall who. Not a great day. Tua was picked one time by Jordan Poyer when he tried to hit Braxton Berrios down the middle of the field. Looked like Poyer basically was roaming center field, saw Tua's eyes, and jumped in front of Berrios to make the pick. And as I tweeted out, not an ideal pick, but from an offensive standpoint, from a defensive standpoint, seeing Poyer make that kind of play is highly encouraging because, again, if Jordan Poyer is anywhere near as a player what he was during his heyday with the Bills, that's a massive bonus for the Dolphins because regardless, he's going to bring a whole lot in terms of intangibles and leadership to that secondary. And we've already heard several Dolphin players talk about the influence that he's had. The biggest issue on offense wasn't that pick, wasn't a drop passes. Today was snaps. Aaron Brewer and Tua had a third muffed exchange in 2 days. From our vantage points in the stands at the practice facility, could not discern anything dramatically wrong with the snap. Teron Armstead spoke to the media after practice, made an interesting point that because they haven't worked together, this is something that center exchange, that snap, that can take some time, and it could be an issue of Brewer's release point where Tua gets the ball is going to be different than where he got the ball from Connor Williams, this center for the past 2 years, because Connor Williams is a bigger guy than Aaron Brewer is. But that's an issue. We're going to keep an eye on it. It's still in July, not ready to hit the panic button yet, just like was the case, if you remember, Connor Williams has some major shotgun issues in his first camp at center for the Dolphins, and we were kind of cautioning everybody against panicking too quickly. And lo and behold, once the regular season arrived, it wasn't that major of an issue for the Dolphins. But that wasn't all. There were shotgun snap issues with the culprits, including Ireland Brown, the rookie free agent, Jack Driscoll, the veteran newcomer from the Philadelphia Eagles, and then Brewer himself also had a high shotgun snap. When we're talking at high, I'm talking about over the head of the quarterback. Again, we're in July. I'm not going to push the panic button just yet, but that certainly was not ideal. Teron Armstead was back at practice on Tuesday. However, his work was very limited and didn't do any of the team stuff. He's still on a maintenance program. He's a vet. He didn't do a whole lot of practicing for the Dolphins either of the last 2 years. Every time he's been in the game, though, the dude has produced. He's been very, very good. Don't see any reason that's going to change. And if the Dolphins can limit his exposure during the summer without jeopardizing the chemistry and the cohesiveness of the offensive line, I say let's do it. Let's roll with that. The Isaiah Wynn continues to be on PUP. Mike McDaniel was asked about his status before practice Tuesday, said he's in the building. And the one disappointing note in this comment talking about Isaiah Wynn, and he said, I'm not quite at the point to give you an update. I'll come a little bit later. And to me, that kind of signified that we're talking maybe weeks, not days, as far as Isaiah Wynn being able to come off PUP. In terms of practice attendance, or first, let me just mention another guy on PUP, Odell Beckham Jr. We did see him running sprints on the practice field that wasn't occupied by the practice at the time. That's an encouraging sign. He also hasn't practiced, didn't practice at all in the spring, which, given his age, given the injury history of recent years, not 100% ideal. But again, the fact that we saw him running today was encouraging. The players who are on the active roster who we did not see at all at practice on Tuesday included running back Savon Ahmed, running back Raheem Mostert, wide receiver Eric Ezukama, linebacker Anthony Walker Jr., linebacker David Long Jr., and cornerback Cam Smith. McDaniel addressed Cam Smith's status before practice as well, saying in essence that his training camp and preseason will not be compromised. Seemed to indicate that it was nothing serious. We saw Cam Smith on the practice field. It was wearing a compression sleeve over his right leg, so obviously some sort of leg issues. And with Cam Smith, he's a guy who's looking to make a big jump in his second year after not doing a ton, and that's being kind, as a rookie in 2023 after being the team's first pick in the draft, second rounder out of South Carolina. He needs the reps. He's going to be doing battle possibly with Ethan Bonner and Surin Neal for that fourth cornerback spot behind Kendall Fuller, Jalen Ramsey, and Kader Kohu, who had a great day of practice, by the way, broke up a couple of passes, including a long one down the left sideline, which you may have seen on the Dolphins social media account. This was a play where Tua stepped up in the pocket after it appeared that Quentin Bell was going to get him for a sack. And again, every time we talk about practice and we talk about pressure and we talk about sacks, understand that once a pass rusher gets even remotely close to the quarterback, he's going to stop. They are not to touch the quarterbacks. And what happens is the play continues. The quarterback will move around a little bit. The quarterback doesn't just, okay, I would have been sacked in the game, so I stop. No, the quarterback's going to continue to play. And this is where sometimes you're going to have fans, media going gaga over a big play in practice where others like myself are not going to even mention it because that happened as part of a continuation of a play that would have been ended in a regular season game or in a game setting. And on this particular play, again, Tua stepped to the left, fired down the field, looked like he had a nice completion to Devon Achane. Kohu never gave up on the play, got his hand in there between where Achane was holding the ball, eventually was able to dislodge it as Achane fell to the ground. Great play. Had another pass breakup against Jalen Waddle on the pass over the middle. Very impressive work right there. What was most impressive, again, up front for me for a second consecutive day, there are a couple of guys who just keep jumping out like nobody's business. And those two guys who really jump out, Quentin Bell, who you may remember from Hard Knocks as the guy who played the role of Max Crosby on the scout team last year, and who Tua asked to keep bumping him so he could get a feel for what he was going to experience on game day. Man, that dude is all over the place. You notice him constantly. Zeke Vandenberg, to a lesser extent, also noticeable. And then the other guy, really, really, really noticeable and reason to be excited, even though it's still early in camp. It's not the same as the preseason or even joint practices or the regular season. But Chop Robinson, holy smokes. Had a couple of plays today. There was one play, there was a pitch to a running back, and I apologize, I did not know who the running back was. But Robinson was basically at his feet when he got the ball. That's how quick he got through the line, and he was not offside. And there was a couple of pass rushes where Robinson got around the edge and applied pressure and might have gotten a sack in a game situation. So you want to talk about a guy giving everybody reason to be excited about what he could do as a rookie first-round pick. That guy's doing it. Very, very, very impressive stuff there. In terms of the other players, those are the guys who really signed. Emmanuel Ogbah had another quote-unquote would-be sack. He also is looking good, which is good news because the Dolphins very well may have to start the regular season without Bradley Chubb, possibly without Jalen Phillips, who, by the way, was playing catch with fans at the Baptist Health Training Complex before practice on Tuesday. Also very cool. The rookies come out before every practice and pump up the fans who were there, and everyone has their little shtick that they do. And today was Jason Matra, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, a rookie free agent who did a backflip followed by another rookie free agent, a rookie doing the worm in front of the fans. So cool way to get it started. Before we address the offensive line and the issues, this is history lesson, but not history lesson because it applies to recent comments made by John Elway, Hall of Fame quarterback for the Denver Broncos, who went on to become their GM, who said on a podcast this week that his biggest regret as a GM was not taking Josh Allen with the 5th overall pick in the 2018 NFL draft. And the what ifs here are tremendous when it comes not just for the Denver Broncos, but for the Bills and for the Miami Dolphins, who had Elway, who himself was a tall pocket passer, who certainly would have had every kind of reason to like Josh Allen as a prospect. Interesting how that would have played out had Elway done that. And interestingly, if you recall, the Bills wound up trading from 12 to 7 that year to get their hands on Josh Allen, who they clearly, obviously, really liked, in part because he had the big arm to be able to throw in the wind in Buffalo. The Bills initially had conversations with the Broncos for that 5th overall pick, and Elway told him, we'll make the deal unless one of the non-quarterbacks that we really like is available on the board. And lo and behold, one of those guys was Bradley Chubb. And he was there at number 5. So the Broncos took him, told the Bills, sorry, you're going to have to look for somebody else. The Bills made the trade, moved up from 12 to 7. And later reporting suggested the Bills had their eye on 2 quarterbacks that particular draft. One, obviously, Josh Allen. The other one was Baker Mayfield, if you recall, number 1 overall to the Cleveland Browns. And interestingly enough, there was another organization whose head coach was enamored with those 2 guys, and that would be the Miami Dolphins and Adam Gase, who didn't necessarily care for Sam Darnold or for Josh Rosen or even Lamar Jackson, but really liked Baker Mayfield, really liked Josh Allen. As it turned out that year, if you recall, the Dolphins got the aforementioned Minkah Fitzpatrick with the 11th overall pick. That pick can never be argued as far as being a good pick. Now, if you want to play the result because of what happened a year later, sure. But that's the issue with player management, not the draft pick itself. It was a great selection. Minkah Fitzpatrick's a great player. He's an all-pro more often than not, and very early in his career to suggest he might end up in the Hall of Fame is not ridiculous. So obviously, had the Denver Broncos selected Josh Allen, he wouldn't have been in Buffalo. Dolphins wouldn't have had to deal with him on a yearly basis, twice a year. And for those who want to poo-poo that, well, Josh Allen's the biggest reason the Buffalo Bills have won the last 4 AFC titles. Probably the biggest reason they're favored to do it again in 2024. I don't think it's a stretch to suggest he's the second best quarterback in the NFL behind Patrick Mahomes. And then from the other standpoint, ironic that the Broncos bypassed Josh Allen in favor of wound up in Miami. That, of course, being Bradley Chubb. If the Broncos select Josh Allen instead, Bradley Chubb goes to another team. Who knows where he is 5 years into his career and where the Dolphins can make that trade. So you want to talk about a what if, and there was a movie, Open Doors, maybe it's called, Sliding Doors, where one event is changed and it changes the course of several other events. And this was what could have happened if John Elway had selected Josh Allen, which now he says was his biggest regret as a Denver Broncos GM. Back to the Dolphins, their concern right now is not quarterback. Their concern is the offensive line. And it's not just the snapping issues, even though immediately that's the bigger issue. There's just a lot of uncertainty on that offensive line. And I wrote about that on Miami Dolphins on SI. The URL is under my name, si.com/NFL/Dolphins. We kind of had a sort of an idea of what the starting offensive line would look like heading into training camp. We was going to be Teron Armstead at left tackle, Isaiah Wynn at left guard, Aaron Brewer at center, whole bunch of contenders for the starting right guard position, Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones, Lester Cotton, maybe Jack Driscoll, who can play a lot of different places on the offensive line, and then Austin Jackson at right tackle. We discussed Armstead and his limited availability so far in practice, the fact he's on a maintenance program. Some days he'll practice, some days he won't. And the Dolphins are doing that with several veteran players, including Raheem Mostert. Looked like they're doing that possibly with David Long Jr., even though he was nursing some sort of an issue at the start of training camp, remember. And so not a major issue as far as Armstead is concerned. And while we're talking about players on maintenance program, Calais Campbell was back at practice on Tuesday, and he had a nice play against the run on one occasion where he met Devon Achane in the hole for what would have been a tackle for no gain. And Calais Campbell, when you see him on the field, well, we already know he's 6'8", but he looks every part of 6'8". He is a tall individual. The issue right now on the offensive line is Isaiah Wynn. The fact that he hasn't practiced is a tad problematic. The fact that the offensive line is surrendering a lot of pressure is a bit problematic, although this is where we point out that is not unusual for the early part of training camp. More often than not, early in training camp, the defense is ahead of the offense. You will have your big splash plays here and there, and they will occur on a regular basis because Tyreek Hill didn't catch a long pass today, but it wasn't like he wasn't open deep or he didn't go deep a couple of times. There was a play where there was very, very good double coverage by Ethan Bonner and Marcus May. There was another occasion where Tua couldn't hit him. I'm trying to remember the play. If he wasn't necessarily that wide open. Mike White could have had him on about a 20, 25-yard hookup and was off the mark. It was a rough day again for Mike White and Skylar Thompson, who so far in my very limited training camp viewing have regressed quite a bit from last summer in terms of the training camp performance. Again, still early, but so far in those two practices, not like what I've seen from Mike White or Skylar Thompson in the least. Back to the offensive line. So right now what we have is a lot of uncertainty. We don't know exactly when Isaiah Wynn's going to be back. Do we need to now use a pencil or very light pencil for his name at the starting left guard position? Could there be another contender who could emerge? I think your likely candidates right now, I think Liam Eichenberg looks like a solid contender to be the starting right guard. Again, he's the guy who started a lot of games for the Dolphins as the 2021 second round pick. And the hope is he can make the kind of jump that Austin Jackson made last year in his fourth season in the NFL. Different circumstances, though, and I mentioned this on the podcast in an earlier episode, that a lot of credit was given to Butch Barry, which is fair, but I think also we need to understand the fact that Austin Jackson barely played in 2022, and so we never got to look realistically at Austin Jackson in the Mike McDaniel scheme until last year, and it's a scheme that's much better suited for his skill set, focusing more on mobility among the offensive linemen than perhaps power and physicality. So ideally, you would like to have the offensive line settled sooner rather than later. Generally speaking, a lot of coaches talked about when the preseason was 4 games. Generally speaking, your head coaches would talk about the third preseason game being in the target date for having your offensive line settled. Now that you have only 3 preseason games, could it be earlier? In an ideal world, yeah. Sometimes actually it happens earlier. For some teams, it's already settled. For other teams, it can take a little bit longer. I don't think it's settled for the Dolphins, certainly, and it's not going to be settled until we know and we see Isaiah Wynn on the practice field. But right now, that would be the one area of concern for the whole team. I think the front seven is looking very impressive. The edge defenders, which had to be one of the biggest concerns heading into training camp because of the absence of Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, that's been a very, very positive group. And I haven't even mentioned Zeke Vandenberg, who's looked really, really good. Also making plays all over the place. The guy who was a rookie free agent last year, spent the entire season on IR. He's looked good. Now, having said that, again, the edge defenders have looked great. It's early in training camp. The offensive line is kind of in a transitional state right now, trying to progress slowly but surely. So don't necessarily want to get overly hyped, but considering what they're doing right now, there's reason to be optimistic with that group. The DB group looks pretty solid right now. Haven't seen a lot of Marcus May in the 2 days of practice that I've watched, although he did have the one combination coverage with Ethan Bonner deep on Tyreek Hill. And then Cater, as I mentioned, had a really, really, really good day. Jalen Ramsey went up against Jalen Waddle in the one-on-ones. This was something the Dolphins did today. One-on-one, it's backs and tight ends against linebackers in a route running coverage drill. O-lineman against D-lineman, pass rushing, pass protecting drill, and you have the wide receivers against the DBs. And as I always say in those drills involving passing and coverage, always understand when you read about a completion that the defender is asked to cover half the field, one side, the entire half, one side of the field, with the quarterback having no pressure, complete visibility, and no pass rush. So logically, it's a drill that's set up for the offense to succeed. Having said that, Jalen Ramsey and Jalen Waddle had 2 reps against each other. On the first one, Jalen Waddle ran an up and out, made the catch. And on the second one, it was a very short out pattern, and Ramsey was all over him in coverage. So, but those are to be taken for a grain of salt. If you hear about it, the DB getting burned in coverage on those, again, take it for what it's worth. It happens frequently. If it's badly beaten, it's one thing. If it just get beat, it'd be a little bit, it's going to happen in that drill. But again, the prevailing theme on this particular day was the offense looked like, I hate to use the words of my former All Dolphins podcast co-host, but I'm going to anyway. It looked like booty cheeks. Bad snaps, drops by Jonnu, the pick. It was rough. Dolphins are off on Wednesday. My plan right now is to do a live podcast, thinking perhaps 8 p.m. Eastern time. I will put out a tweet to announce it. And also, if you subscribe, you will get the notification. And if you do not subscribe, please do so. Please like, share that good stuff. I appreciate everyone watching. I appreciate all the comments, some more than others. I never object to disagreements whatsoever, as long as it's done respectfully and understanding that these are my opinions. You may not agree with them. They are not done with any sort of bias or whatever, regardless of what you may think, but that's the deal. Anyway, again, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you later.